It's often said in both Christian circles and African spiritual conscious circles that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. Have you heard that? Well, I can very much appreciate that thinking. The Most Honorable, or the Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan, has given us, thank you, a higher understanding. And so the wording here must be tweaked in order to really be accurate, especially as it relates to Black people. We are not simply spiritual beings having a human experience. Rather, we are gods languishing in a human condition. Our current humanity is not simply an experience to be had. Our humanity is a condition to be overcome. In the beginning, in our original state of existence, our humanity complemented our divinity. This is why it can be said that the Black man is God. Humanity and divinity were wed to each other. However, after the fall of Black Adam, that first Adam, after his fall, our humanity became an impediment to our divinity. So much so, in fact, that our humanity has in America developed into devil. This is one of the reasons why the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad instructed his chief student, the Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan, stop saying a white man is the devil. Don't say that no more. He raised the ante, said, call him Satan. The enemy, the slave master's children. Don't use devil anymore, because he knew that ultimately we were going to come face to face with the reality that we have been made devil by the devil. So within each of us, a war between God and Satan rages. Every single one of us in here. A war between God and Satan is raging. What does this have to do with the misery of Black life in America? And what does the misery of Black life in America have to do with God's design for a new humanity? We know from the Bible and from the Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan that love is kind. Love is patient. Love is long-suffering. The Bible also tells us that God is love. Well, if God is love, and love is long-suffering, then God himself has an intimate relationship with suffering. In fact, it can be said that suffering, a certain kind or class of suffering, has a divine quality inherent within it. I will come back to that qualification, a certain kind or class of suffering. I'll come back to that in a minute. But you say, isn't that blasphemy? To say that God, who has power over all things and all people, suffers and is long-suffering? No, it's not blasphemy. It's divine truth. God Most High is long-suffering. Is not 6 trillion years a long time? That is how long it took God, having given birth to himself out of the triple dark womb of space, to self-evolve or self-create his organic person, stage by stage, level by level. A painful 6 trillion year process until God, the first human being. Did you get that? God, the first human being, emerged in his glory. During this period of growth, and we can call it organic ascension, God suffered pain from the process, according to the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. And this established a universal law that there is no birth, no growth, no leveling up, no new human being without the experience of pain and suffering, even for God. Slide, please. The conditions which prevailed in the beginning, when God emerged as the first human being, those conditions now prevail among the black man and woman in America, from whom the new human being was prophesied and destined to emerge. The book of Genesis in the Bible opens with the words, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was void and without form. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the deep." In the Hebrew text, behind the words of King James, void and without form is tahu vabohu. Tahu vabohu. That's the Hebrew translated void and without form. And this is an ancient Hebraic description of the raw conditions of some of the black matter or material substance which God used to build the universe and to build his own material body. In the Holy Quran, this primordial matter, if you will, is poetically described as black mud, from which Adam's body was made. After 464 years of developing in the womb of American white supremacy, slavery, suffering, and death, we, a once great African people, have been reduced to void and without form. To be voided, according to Maryam, is to have the inner part of something cut away and left vacant with a narrow border left at the sides. Having been kidnapped and brought to America in the holds of ships, our names, language, culture, religion, God, and identity were all stripped from us during the breaking process, a process necessary in order to transform a Muslim man and Muslim woman into a slave or a Negro. The inner self of the black man and woman have been cut out. We have been voided and are formed unmade. We now exist in the condition of tohu vabohu, of void and without form. The so-called Negro in America is but a shell of who and what he used to be. But this is the perfect set of conditions, allowing God to make a new human being. As it was in the beginning, so is it now in the end of this world. You, black man and woman, have suffered what no human population has ever had to endure in the last 6,000 years of human history. Nobody's suffering compares to yours because you have been made to descend lower than any people ever have. You are poised to ascend higher than any people can. Why is that? What is the principle undergirding this? The principle is undeserved suffering is redemptive. I said above that there is a certain class of suffering that has a divine quality inherent within it. All of us suffer or have suffered or experienced pain and disappointment in our daily lives, but all suffering ain't created equal. The hierarchy of suffering, is laid out brilliantly and clearly in 1 Peter, 2nd chapter, 19 and 20th verse. It says, quote, "For it is commendable if a man endures pain of unjust suffering because he is conscious of God. But what glory is it if a man receives a beating for doing wrong and takes it patiently? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable to God." If we mess up and are made to bear the consequences of our wrong, and we suffer those consequences patiently, well, good for us. But ain't no glory in that. That's simple, mundane mathematics. Cause, effect. We can and should learn lessons from our mistakes, lessons that help make us better persons, but there is no crown for that. However, to endure unjust suffering while doing good, glory is in that. I would say that the misery of black life in America is the illegitimate and deformed child of these two. Our personal misery is a spawn of the unfortunate union between, on the one hand, redemptive suffering ordained by God, which we misperceive, and on the other hand, vain sufferings that we bring into our lives by our own hand, our own mouth, our own thinking. Vain suffering is the bid that our willful decisions have prepared for us to lay in, while redemptive suffering prepares a crown of glory tailor-made for each of our heads to don. Any woman who has borne a child knows the goodness that emerges from suffering. The intense pain of labor is redeemed by the blessing of the child, a new human being who came through the portal of pain and suffering. It was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who so beautifully captured the scriptural truth in the words, undeserved suffering is redemptive. West Africans did nothing to white people to deserve the horrors of the Holocaust of slavery. But God willed that should happen. And redemption for this undeserved suffering is fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that his seed will be enslaved in a strange land for 400 years. But after that time, God will come to that people, judge their enslavers, bring the people out with great substance. Do you realize what that great substance is? For 66 trillion years, the earth was governed by a council, a true executive council indeed, a secret order of black gods who had in their hands the lordship of all of the worlds. And for 66 trillion years, these black lords derived from a single family or tribe from the east. But in the last days, the sun of Islam will no longer rise from the east and shine on the west. Rather, the sun of Islam is now rising from the west, and the divine rulers of the entire world is now and from henceforth derived from the black man and woman here in the hills of North America. After the power of white people is broken, the territories of the earth will need rulers. And your suffering at the hands of white people is the purchase price we have already paid to be Lord over the world, including Lord over white people, to the extent that there are any left on the earth. Redemption for our undeserved suffering is God's choice of us and our progeny to be the future rulers of the planet, breaking a 66 trillion year protocol. That's big. Just as black people as a collective are in a covenant with God that involves redemptive suffering, so too are we as individuals. Did you know that? And while the collective victory is guaranteed by God, black people will be victorious. That's a fact. You can take that to the bank. However, each of us as individuals have to work out our victory over death. And that, I suggest, is the source of much of our personal mental health issues. Because we don't properly perceive God's work in our personal life. The suffering that God ordains for his servants as a matter of universal, non-negotiable, natural law. Before we can ever get to the redemptive phase of the suffering, we abort or sabotage the process. And the difficulties in our life that should be redemptive for us later cause us to fall into bitterness and depression. They become self-destructive of us, causes us to take drugs to ease our pain, smoke weed to ease our pain, drink alcohol, eat obsessively, cause us to run from one man to another, from one woman to another, to ease our pain or escape the difficulty factor. We gorge ourselves on social painkillers. And instead of killing the pain, which we never do, these things are literally killing us and robbing us of our reward. But if we understand properly and perceive correctly the way God works in each and every one of our lives, we will not be subdued by our pain, but we will be empowered by it. We draw power from our undeserved suffering. When I was last blessed, to have an audience with the Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan, I shared with him a personal matter that had been the source of great difficulty and stress for me, and even, I guess, low-key started to subdue me. But when he said to me straight up that that's Allah's trial on you, that confirmation changed my whole perspective. So while before my shoulders started to droop under the stress, now my head lifted and my shoulders straightened. No longer subdued by the pain, I was and am empowered by it. Dr. King helped us to understand that there is a moral force inherent in undeserved suffering. Those of us battered by the storms of persecution, hatred, and even unwarranted personal injury in our dealings with others, we have the moral high ground in this world. And as such, we have the transformative and redemptive power of God and His Christ sustaining us and guaranteeing our vindication. Guaranteeing our vindication, so long as we don't abdicate. So long as we don't abdicate a moral high ground by returning evil for evil. You know, hurt people. But black people who have been and continue to be hurt by white people, we never return hurt to white people. Hurt black people only hurt black people.
That's right. That's right.
And this is why righteousness is so important in this day. For it is a guard against vain suffering. What is righteousness? It's obedience to God and treating others as you would want to be treated. That's righteousness. The rebel against God's mandates or against the guidance of God's apostle. To rebel against God or his apostle is to pile vain sufferings on our plate that we're going to have to eat. And to treat your brother or your sister in ways that you will not appreciate being treated sets off a karmic reaction that eventually will visit us. And this contributes to so much of the misery and depression that characterizes black life in America. But our undeserved suffering is redemptive. And we channel, if we maintain the moral high ground and channel the force, the moral force inherent in undeserved suffering, then we can be transformed collectively and personally into the next level of humanity. In fact, this 400 years of suffering that black people have endured at the hands of white people, the moral force that has accrued to us as a consequence, that's part of our drip as a people. That's part of our swagger, especially vis-a-vis white people. We should never be in the company of white people, head low, shoulders drooping. We should always be in the company of white people with that moral force empowering us, because we know that redemption is coming to us and retribution is coming to them. Slide, please. The paradigm and model of redemptive suffering is Jesus, who illustrates that God exempts none of his servants from suffering, even his perfect or near perfect servants. Jesus the Christ and Jesus the Messiah are the key to the end of human suffering, because he is the agent through which divinity and humanity are finally reconciled and the new human being is born. But the end of suffering allows or follows on the heels of intense suffering. So the Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan teaches us that it was at the cross that was Jesus's finest hour. The crucifixion, the suffering. That is what separated Jesus, the man of Thursday, and Jesus, the God of Easter Sunday. Slide, please. But the cross is a heavy stumbling block for us as individuals. Both witnessing Jesus' cross and also experiencing our own cross is a stumbling block for us. 1 Peter, that illustration of redemptive suffering, concludes with this. To this redemptive suffering, you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving as an example, or leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. Jesus' cross or redemptive suffering is not just an example for us. The Greek word translated example is huagramos, which is to follow a piece of writing given to a beginner student. The scripts or the letters of the script of the writing to be copied and imitated by the student letter by letter. That's what a huagramos is. This is what the example of Jesus' suffering is described as a writing that students must copy and imitate, letter by letter. Slide, please. See, in the Nation of Islam, we refer to this huagramos as the Savior's letter, which begins the process of each Muslim to be student enrolled in the class of God. Each beginner, each new stand-up convert to the nation, each new processor to the Nation of Islam is expected to copy the letter perfectly, imitating the script. That means each individual letter must be imitated near perfectly, and our Savior's letter will be rejected. And we cannot begin the process of redemption because, family, the path to redemption for our 464 years of undeserved suffering, that path is the Nation of Islam. You and we must come through this portal, this womb, this mosque, in order to be refined and transformed into a new humanity. This is why I'm sorry, I respect all of us. I respect all black, let me not lie. I respect most black organizations, black leaders, people who are doing progressive things. I respect y'all. You have your place. And those who mimic the Nation of Islam, we are flattered, but be real clear. Except you actually come through this. You have to come through this to qualify for redemptive suffering. Now, why do I say it? Am I set tripping? The Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan, in Pathology and Hypocrisy, he teaches us from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad that Islam, when you come to this, when you write your letter, when you make that commitment to Master Farad Muhammad, that initiates a process that will, by its nature, bring every single thing that's in you and me, it's gonna bring it out. The good, the bad, the ugly. This walk is going to bring all of it out of us by design. God is going to send, he's going to be the architect of circumstances of our life. Circumstances that are going to trip us up, are going to expose to us aspects of ourselves that we didn't know. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us about Leviathan in the Bible. And the Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan teaches us what Leviathan really is. Leviathan is this sea monster, this huge, nasty monster of the sea, according to the Bible. The Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan helps us to understand that Leviathan represents the monster that's buried deep in each and every one of us. But because Leviathan is buried so deep, we never encounter it in our daily lives. So you know how the person you thought was a real good person, oh, she's so sweet. Oh, bruh, cool. And then one day, you see ugly, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? Or you look in the mirror and say, whoa, where did that come from? That came from God. The monster buried in each and every one of us has to be brought to the surface. God will bring circumstances to our life that will disturb our emotions because the deep sea that Leviathan is lodged in represents our emotions. And if circumstances are rough enough to disturb our waters enough, get us emotional enough, that Leviathan will come up. But in God's design, the point of awakening each and every one of our Leviathan, the reason for bringing our monster out of us is so that we can kill the monster, not become the monster. The aim of Islam is to bring to the surface our beautiful and our ugly, so that we can build on our beautiful and kill our ugly, because the science of Leviathan, once Leviathan is exposed, we gotta kill it, or it will kill us. Kill us by dominating our personality. So instead of having a moment, a moment of ugliness, we just become ugly. So yeah, there's ugly acting Muslims in the mosque. Yeah. Don't be dismayed by that. Don't assume that Islam failed in their case because Islam is supposed to be beautiful and peace, and maybe they are ugly and rancorous. That don't mean that Islam failed with them. It means Islam is working with them. They're just still in that, or we are just still in that ugly phase. So be patient with the process.